A and B and C are three friends living together. Okay, but now A and C recently seems to be having conversations, but just between the two. And when they do, they go into a room and they close the door when they are having their conversations. Okay, so B, who noticed that, is feeling a little bit left out. Okay, so B is actually going to talk about it today. Okay, so we have a little bit of drama today. So B is going to start the conversation by asking the question, why do you talk? And of course, we're talking about you guys, right? A and C. Why do you talk? Have your conversations with the door closed. And as a way of saying that, yes, after you close the door. Okay, so B is feeling a little bit left out and therefore, of course, upset. Okay, now, is this the only way you can say it? No, of course, there are a lot of other ways you can say basically the same thing as well. There's another way of actually building the sentence in a way that is much more similar to, why do you talk with the door closed? However, that way of saying it could be quite poetic. So, in everyday speech, when you're speaking colloquial Korean, as a way of saying, why do you talk with the door closed? It's best to say it like this. Why do you talk after you close the door? Okay, so we have a bridge. Now, of course, the first thing that you have to do whenever you have a bridge is to identify whether it's a reverse bridge or not, right? Now, can you look at after as a reverse bridge? Okay, yes, we're going to look at it as a reverse bridge. Okay, so yes, now we're going to start with the pink sentence. Now, of course, no you. Of course, I'm talking to you. And, of course, no articles, no us and does. So we have the verb close and we have the object door. Okay, and, of course, the second thing that you always have to keep in mind when you see a bridge is the fact that a bridge can never ever be a standalone. It always has to become a part of the word right in front of it as its ending. And yes, because we're going to start with the pink sentence, that's why close will be the word right in front of it. And then, yes, no do, placing do in front of a question sentence that already has a verb as an auxiliary verb is not something that you would do in Korean. So take it away. And of course, I'm talking to you. Okay, so on the blue side, we have an adverb why, and we have the verb talk. Okay, so now, Now today, we're going to actually do something a little bit unorthodox today. Okay, now, this is something that you now have to get a little bit used to when you're using a sentence that was actually two sentences that was connected through a bridge. Okay, now, what we're going to do today is, now when you have adverbs, I always say adverbs are quite flexible, right? So when you're using a compound sentence, a sentence that was originally two sentences but was connected through a bridge, when you have a compound sentence and you have an adverb, now the adverb can be very flexible, meaning that the adverb, if needed, can travel to the pink sentence. For example, if you have an adverb in the blue sentence. The same with, for example, if you have an adverb in the pink sentence. Okay, so now usually when I have the adverb travel a lot, am I doing it just for the sake of doing it? Of course not. Usually, I'm doing it because of the general theme of Korean grammar, right? The later it appears, the more important it is. Okay, so if I feel like there's something more important than the adverb, then I'm going to have the adverb travel all the way here so that it doesn't get too much spotlight. If I feel like it is important, I will have it appear as late as possible. Okay, so right now, let's say B is very fixated on door. Okay, so hey, I know why you guys talk. Well, of course. I mean, we're people. We sometimes talk. We have conversations. Okay, I get that. But why with the door closed, though? So B wants to really emphasize door. Therefore, now even though the blue sentence should come last, once again, when you have a compound sentence, the adverb sometimes, if needed, can travel to the other sentence. So I want Y to come, yes, at the very beginning of the sentence because I don't want it to get more spotlight than door. So actually, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to have it travel to the pink sentence. Okay, so I'm going to start with 왜. Why? Because B is so frustrated on the fact that A keeps slamming the door closed. So B is so much fixated on the door. This is what is making B angry right now. Okay, so, and then door, 문, and of course, A is feeling upset, frustrated because B feels left out. A and C keep going into that room and they close the door and they seem to be having some kind of a conversation with me left out. So of course, because I'm frustrated, I can give the object an object particle, right? Okay, so 문을. So right now, I'm going to give the object an object particle for reason number 2, right? Frustration or surprise, to imbue the nuance of frustration or surprise into the word, and of course, by extension, the whole sentence. Okay, so we have, oops, I'm not sure if I have enough space to draw the frustrated face. Okay, so 왜 문을, and then, yes, we took care of the adverb, object, and then let's go to the verb. So, yes, when you're talking about closing eyes or closing your mouth, well, of course, that's a different version of close, but when you're talking about some kind of a door, window, or some kind of a box, yes, we're going to use 닫다. Okay, but I don't want its display form, right? I want the after ending. And the after ending, of course, there are a lot of versions of it, but the base form of it would be a no route ending that just looks like 고. Okay, and because I feel like it's kind of too messy, I'll just give the object particle the same color so that the structure of the whole sentence is a little bit more intuitive. 문을. Okay, but do keep in mind, this 을 is not going to be translated, right? Just because something takes the form of consonants and vowels does not mean that it's a meaning word that will be translated. Sometimes it's just a grammatical device that indicates something. Okay, so 왜 문을 닫고, so after closing the door, and I had why come all the way here because I don't want it to get too much spotlight. And then now let's go to the blue sentence. Yes, there used to be two words, the adverb why and the verb talk. But because I thought that closing the door and talking is much more, yes, being emphasized much more compared to why, yes, I had why travel all the way here. So what's left in the blue sentence is just the verb talk. Okay, now when you're saying talk, when you're using a verb that has anything to do with saying something, like say, tell, talk, yes, of course, excluding all the poetic versions, you're left with the big two, right? 말하다 and 얘기하다. Okay, so I see that there are a lot of ways of explaining the difference between the two, and I do believe personally that some of them are quite misleading. Okay, so in order to exactly understand the difference between the two, well, first we're going to look at them as do noun verbs because they are do noun verbs, right? What are do noun verbs? Verbs that end with hada. If you have a verb that ends with hada, usually there are rare exceptions, but usually you have a do noun verb. Why do I call it a do noun verb? Well, it's quite simple, right? The reason why I named them do noun verbs is very, very simple because they're just a combination of do, hada, and a noun. So, for example, the verb sing, 노래하다. Actually, it became a verb through, people made it a verb simply through taking the noun song and attaching do to it so that it has now verb properties. Okay, so if you're aware of this concept, then it means that you can just learn a word, but you go back with two, right? So yes, very efficient. So if I learn sing, then it means that I know song. I can just remove hada, and now I have the noun. Okay, so it means that in this case as well, if I take away hada, I'm left with a noun. So the reason why I'm explaining this is because through looking at them as do noun verbs, now it will help you memorize the difference between the two. 말 is the noun word. And 얘기 is the noun story. Okay, so what's the difference between word and story? Well, the difference comes from length. So, yes, usually when you're saying like a word or maybe a short phrase or a very short sentence at most, that's when you use 말하다 because the essence of that verb came from the noun word. A story, on the other hand, is much longer than just a word, right? So when you're saying something very long, like a series of sentences or maybe even a couple of paragraphs, then that's usually 얘기하다. Okay, so do word, do story. Of course, when you're saying something long, of course, it should be closer to a story. So, for example, if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, what's your name?" In that case, they will say, "Can you please say your name?" 말하다. Okay, because I'm not going to go into like a whole paragraph when they ask me my name, right? But if someone says, "Hey, I heard that you traveled the world for 3 years and then came back yesterday. Can you please tell me what happened during the trip?" Now, it's likely going to be a very long story. So in that case, they will say, "Can you please 얘기하다?" Okay, so it depends. Now, A and B keeps going, I'm sorry, A and C keeps going into a room and they are having like a conversation with the door closed and B feels like B is feeling left out and they stay there, they talk for like 30 minutes. So I'm going to use 얘기하다. Okay, but now I know which version I'm going to use as talk. Yes, because even when you're saying talk, if they're saying something very short, you could have said 말하다 as well. So it depends on the length. Okay, now I don't want its display form though. I know what I want to use, but I still don't want its display form. I need to inflect it. I want its actual form in present tense, the base form ending. So let's give it the yo ending. So let's go to inflection route number 1, of course. Yes, we know exactly what to do, right? In inflection route number 1, the rules are, because the ending that we're using belongs to inflection route number 1. Okay, so 얘기하다. So, yes, in this case, when the display form that you're using ends with the ha syllable, yes, you apply a 3-step formula, right? 다 없애요, get rid of 다, remove 다, and then change ha into 해, and then now 드디어 attach the ending. So, 얘기해요, 얘기해요, 얘기해요. And of course, I am not going to give the H and H sound, right? Because it's somewhere in the middle of a word. It's practically going to be silent. So I'm not going to say 얘기해요. I'm going to say 얘기해요. Okay, now when you're saying story or talk using the noun story, now sometimes you might see this version as well. 이야기해요. Okay, so you could say, what's the difference between 이야기 and 얘기? They're both story, but yes, as I sometimes say, 이야기 can be extremely poetic. So it's not for everyday speech. Okay, so it's going to be extremely poetic. So, for example, I'm sure that we all have this kind of experience. You know when someone just comes up to you out of nowhere, there was no contextual buildup, and just says, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." And now, I could be a little bit nervous, right? Because I don't know, like you're all of a sudden so serious. You're coming to me and saying, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." So I could be nervous because it might be bad news, right? Now, I'm sure that we all have this kind of an experience at least once, right? However, now, if someone comes to me and says, "I need to talk to you," and they say, "I need to 이야기해요 with you." Now, I'm not going to be nervous because it might be bad news. I'm nervous because of this word. That's how poetic it is. I would say, if it's a close friend that I can banter with, I would actually say, "Hey, I have no problem talking to you, but yeah, I don't think you're like well right now. Is there something wrong? I need to talk to you. You don't need to talk to me. I need to talk to you. There's something wrong with you right now." So, yeah, it's not the fact that he's all serious all of a sudden that will make me nervous. It's the choice of word that will make me nervous. That's how poetic it is. Okay. Yeah, or I'm going to say, "Let's talk when you sober up." Okay? Because I don't think you're sober right now. So, 얘기해요. Talk. Okay, so now once again, yes, always keep in mind, now the general theme of Korean grammar is the later it appears, the more important it is, right? So even though there is a structure of grammar, sometimes you can do something unorthodox, right? That means that if I think that a word should not be as important as the other words, then I will drag it all the way to the very beginning of the sentence. Because once again, the later it appears, the more important it is. So when you have a compound sentence, what you can do, usually with adverbs, because adverbs are the most flexible, now you can have an adverb that is in the second sentence travel all the way to the first sentence if you feel like it shouldn't be more highlighted compared to the others. So right now, B really wants to emphasize closing the door. B is saying, "Hey, why do you guys talk with the door closed? That's making me upset. That makes me feel like I'm being left out." So that's why, even though Y started here, I made it come all the way here. So, 왜 문을 닫고 얘기해요? I'm sorry, let's place a 물음표 at the end to indicate that it's a 질문, a question. So, 왜 문을 닫고 얘기해요? 왜 문을 닫고 얘기해요? Okay, and always, I'm sure that some of you are sick and tired of me hearing me say this at this point, but still, yes, I'm not giving the object an object particle just because it is an object, of course not. I'm giving it for a very, very specific reason. That reason being in order to imbue the nuance of frustration or surprise, in this case, specifically speaking, frustration. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Maybe that is the case. Maybe B is nosy, or maybe A and C are really kind of like, yes, trying to have B feel left out. Okay, let's take a look. What's going to happen? Today we have a little bit of drama. Okay, so Now, is B overthinking? Or is there really something going on here? Okay, now A is going to say, hey, we didn't mean anything by it. Hey, come on. I just closed it. Habitually. Hey, I didn't mean anything by it. I just habitually close the door whenever I enter some kind of a room. Hey, it's not about you, it's just a habit of mine. Okay, so of course, no I. Of course, B is talking to A, and A closed the door. Of course, A is saying I. We have the adverb just, and then we have the verb closed, and no it. Of course, I'm talking about the door, and we have the adverb habitually. Okay, so once again, now we have two adverbs. I will make sure that habitually comes later because it should be more highlighted. Because A is trying to say, hey, don't get it wrong, don't get it twisted. It's just a habit of mine. Come on, you're overthinking, you're overreacting here. I just did it habitually. So more spotlight, which means that it should come later compared to just. Okay, so 그냥, just. And then, yes, we know that, well, we know a skill that we can use to take a noun and change it into an adverb that best expresses the essence of that noun, right? So now the noun 습관 means habit. So how can you change it into the adverb habitually? The adverb that best expresses the essence of habit. So, yes. So this is a very convenient skill, right? Now take a noun, habit in this case, and if you want to change it into an adverb that best expresses the essence of that noun, yes, we're just going to attach 적으로 behind it. 적으로. So, 습관적으로. I took habit and I changed it into habitually. Okay, so yes, you can do it with other nouns as well. So 본능, instincts. So of course when you want to say instinctively, then just attach 본능적으로. So now you have instinctively. And also, for example, let's use another example, 과학, science. So then if I attach 적으로 to it, then we have scientifically. Okay, so yes, also if you know this concept, then once again, if you see a word that looks like this, 습관적으로, and someone tells you that it's the adverb habitually, then now you can track down its source, and now you're learning two words with the effort of learning one. If you learned this adverb 습관적으로, habitually, then you should, even though you have never seen the noun 습관, habit before, you should be able to track down the source, the noun, 습관, the origin. Okay, so anyway, right now that's why we're going to say 습관적으로 as habitually. Okay, 습관적으로. Now, and then close. 닫다. Once again, we know the version of close that we will use, right? We're talking about a door, so this is the version of close that we will use. Okay, but once again, I always say make sure that you're learning the language in a way that shows you how the language works when three key players all work together in tandem. Context, grammar, and nuance. So if you want to make sure of that, the best thing to do is to close your eyes And have yourself be sucked into the situation when you're practicing making sentences in some kind of a situation, and imagine that you are the speaker. Because now we are human beings, and therefore we use language as means of communication. If that's the case, then even if I know what I want to say, how I will say it, well, everything depends on everything. So, how you feel will influence and affect how I should say what I want to say. What I feel also should affect how I should say what I want to say. So, right now, I'm not just going to give it the past tense ending because, yes, imagine that you're A. Now, let's feel the situation. Now, have you ever had a situation like this? Or at least have you ever observed a situation like this? Or were you ever in B's shoes? Now let's say A really didn't mean anything by it. Let's say A just really closed it habitually. A was not trying to have B feel left out. But if that's the case, then B is overthinking. He is very, very much overreacting. Okay, now when someone is in that state of mind, what happens usually? We are people, so we know what happens, right? If someone is thinking like that, if they are in that state of mind, they come up with all sorts of scenarios, right? They just look at something that means nothing and they try to make up a scenario out of it when they are in that state of mind. So, did you do this because like you hate me? Well, you just said that. Well, why did you say it like that? Were you trying to like offend me or something like that? So, let's say B is in that state of mind. So, if A is trying to, let's say, appease B, who is in that state of mind, then of course the last thing that you want to do is to be vague, right? So, in this case, if I were A, I would have used the definite ending. Because as A, I want to let B know, hey, I'm not just going to be vague with it. I'm going to, yes, deliver this sentence with 100% definite certainty so that B stops coming up with all sorts of scenarios in his mind. I'm going to say, hey, listen to me. I'm saying this with 100% definite certainty, and I hope that you take it with 100% definite certainty. I closed it just habitually. It means nothing else. So the definite ending is a nuance ending when you want to imbue the nuance of 100% definite certainty in your sentence, right? So we're going to do that. So the definite ending is a shapeshifter, right? So it depends on what it looks like. It depends on two factors. Is it going to a verb, adjective, or noun? And plus, what's the tense here? So we're giving it to closed. So verb in past tense. And yes, when it goes to a verb in past tense, en 거예요, and it belongs to inflection route number 2. Okay, so let's go to inflection route number 2 then. Okay, so we have a situation where we have a display form that ends with the D consonant once ta is removed. 탔다. Okay, now in this case, for now, you are pretty much safe with being aware of 4 exceptions. There are 4 exceptions that follow a 4-step formula. 4 words that have display forms that end with D, but they follow their own 4-step formula. 탔다 is not one of them, so I will apply a 3-step formula. So remove 타, add 으 as the irregular middle section, and then attach 드디어 attach the ending. Okay, so how are we going to say closed, but with 100% definite certainty in the nuance when being delivered? 닫은 거예요. 닫은 거예요. 닫은 거예요. Okay, so now we have closed, but the nuance is very different now, right? The nuance, yes, I'm delivering it with 100% definite certainty in my nuance. Therefore, I want the listener to take it with 100% definite certainty. Okay, 닫은 거예요. 닫은 거예요. Okay. So, always, when you have some time and energy to practice Korean, 99% of your time and effort should go to inflection. Everything else, grammar, pronunciation, reading, and writing, everything else should not exceed 1%. Okay, so 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. Because as you can see, whatever we're trying to say, if you are not comfortable with inflection, then you're always stuck. Sorry. Okay, so when I always use an analogy, I always say studying inflection, let's say we're learning cooking, we're learning how to cook. And yes, it's the same with learning Korean. I always say studying inflection is like grocery shopping. You need something to cook with, right? If you don't have inflection, you cannot learn how to cook because there's nothing to cook with. Okay, so yes, everything is meaningless without being comfortable with inflection. So always, 99% of time and energy allocated to inflection. Okay, 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. Hey, I just closed it habitually, and hey, I'm not being vague here. That's 100% the case. So please don't take it wrong, take it twisted. Okay, so 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? So inflection, of course, the most important aspect of learning Korean. Yes, well, of course, the definition of it, one of the definitions, I'm not talking about inflecting tone or light. Another definition that it has is the changing of the form of a word, usually the ending, to indicate grammatical function or attribute. So, of course, in Korean, yes, all verbs and adjectives start with display forms, and you cannot use them, so you just have to look at them as starting points, and you get to actually an actual form, right? But in the middle, you always have to know the rules. For example, why did the D change into L or R, and then where did the all come from? And now you can attach the ending, the past tense ending, walked. Now in this case, if you want to say if cold, yes, 면 is if, but you cannot use it if you don't know how to get there. You start here, but you have to get to the ending. So where did the ta go? Where did the b go? And then where did the u come from? So now that's why inflection is always the most important aspect of learning Korean. Okay, now a lot of times you might feel like if it's the most important aspect of Korean, to the point where I almost say it is Korean. Now, for example, I'm not saying that this is the case for everyone, but if you feel like, well, then why isn't it why do I feel like it's not being highlighted more then? Well, put yourself in the shoes of teaching Korean. Now, once I point to inflection, let's say there's a student, and I want to tell the student, hey, yes, I think you're very good at A, B, and C, but inflection is limiting you always. So you have to study inflection. Now, also known as conjugation, but now the moment I mention that, I even say that word, then what do I have to do? Now I have to talk about inflection. Okay, now, of course, you all know that inflection is annoying. right? So if I'm not ready to, if I'm not equipped to, if I'm not, yes, willing to explain inflection, then I'm going to try my best to not address the elephant in the room, inflection. So I'm going to beat around the bush. Maybe it's the pronunciation. Maybe it's this. Maybe the writing. Okay, so I'm going to try as hard as I can to not, yes, yes, well, acknowledge that there's a gigantic elephant in the room here called inflection. Okay, so always spend most of your time on inflection. Everything else 1%, everything else inflection 99%. Okay, so 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay, so yes. And this is why I always say that the two most fundamental barriers when it comes to learning Korean, is that the natives are not that helpful because of inflection. Well, the biggest reason is inflection. And yes, your surroundings are deceiving, misleading, right? Because usually if you can see something, if it was shown to you, then it means that it's business Korean. Unless you're stalking someone and eavesdropping their conversation. Okay, so now business Korean is a completely different format of Korean, right? Vocabulary works different, pronunciation works different, reading, writing, and of course grammar works different as well. So that's why I say your surroundings are misleading. And number one, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, the first thing that I said was the natives are not that helpful because they cannot answer the simplest questions, not because they're gatekeeping information, but they really don't know how to explain it. Yes, because Koreans, it's not that they learn inflection, in other words, conjugation. So I'm not saying that that class in school is not popular. That's not what I'm saying. That class does not exist. Okay, so it's kind of like saying, well, I have to go to school now. Do I learn inflection there? No, that's like asking the school to teach you how to walk to get to school. So you don't do that in school, right? Yes, teachers don't come to your home when you're like 2 years old and they start teaching you with walking, right? Hey, we're going to teach you how to walk so that you can come to school one day. Okay, so that's why Koreans will very much shy away from speaking Korean because once they get the question, well, how do you say hungry in Korean? Well, I really cannot answer that question because, first of all, I don't know how you're trying to use it. Are you trying to say when hungry? If hungry? Like was hungry? Yeah, what are you trying to say? And even if I do know how you're trying to use it, I don't know how to explain inflection. Therefore, I just have to say, it's just how it is. You just have to feel it. Listen to it 9,000 times. But of course, if it was that easy, listening to it 9,000 times, then of course, everybody will be good at all languages. We are adults. We have a lot of things to do. So after work, a long day at work, and with all sorts of responsibilities, it's not easy to sit down at the end of your day and listen to a word 9,000 times until you have the whole paradigm in your mind, right? So that's why you have to approach it systematically by studying inflection. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, should we move on? 넘어갈까요? Okay. So now if I were to remind you of the context, the 문맥, B said, hey, why do you guys always talk with the door closed? And A said, hey, hey, you're overthinking. I just close the door habitually. Now B is going to say, B is not going to let go of it easily. B is going to say, well, is there some kind of a secret that you guys are trying to share only between you two and not with me? Okay, so B It doesn't seem like B is going to let go of it easily today. Is there some kind of a secret that is being kept from me? I feel very much left out here. Okay, so we know how to say the predicative adjective there is, right? You can also use it as is there when it's a question, and no us and thus, no articles, and some kind of secret as the subject. Okay, so I always say that the 5 W's can become the 5 S's, right? So what do I mean by that? For example, if I say what, mo, of course, it shouldn't actually sound like mo, right? It just sound like mo because the consonant is M. Now, it can also be something then. So that's what I mean by the 5 W's being the 5 S's as well. Of course, there are other ways of saying the 5 W's and the 5 S's. However, other versions will be either always poetic or usually poetic. Okay, so in the same vein, like what can be something, so who, for example, 누구, can be someone as well. So that's what I mean by the 5 W's being the 5 S's as well. Okay, now that also applies to when you say 무슨, what kind of. So 무슨 will play the role of what kind of, which means that it can also play the role of some kind of. Okay, now they're excluding all the poetic versions. Now, this is the base form of what kind of or some kind of. Always just place it in front of a noun. However, now there's a frustrated version, right? An annoyed version of it, which is 문. So once again, this double vowel right here should not sound actually like wa when the consonant is M or J, right? So even when I use the annoyed version of some kind of or what kind of, that rule when it comes to pronunciation will apply. So I'm not going to say muon, I'm going to say mun, as if it is written like this, mun. Okay, so in this case, I think that it's a perfect situation for B to use the annoyed version. Hey, do you guys have some kind of a secret that I shouldn't know? Well, of course, B is upset right now, so B is going to use the annoyed version of some kind of. So it's not muon, it's just mun. And then secret, 비밀. 뭔 비밀, some kind of secret, and then we know how to say there is, right? So 있다. But of course, I don't want its display form. I want the base form ending, the yo ending. So let's go to inflection route number 1 again. Okay, so what do we have? We have a situation in which the display form that we are using ends with the S consonant once ta is removed. Now, depending on perspective, outside of 6 or 5 or 4 exceptions for now, okay, so there are 4, I'll just say 4 for now, there are 4 exceptions of words that also have display forms that end with S once ta is removed, but they follow their own rules. They follow their own inflecting rule. Okay, inflection rule that is. But 있다 is not one of those exceptions, so therefore I will apply the conventional 3-step rule. Okay, so 3-step formula. So remove ta, and then now place a or o as the irregular middle section, and then 드디어 you can attach the ending, right? So remove 다 없애요, and of course it's not going to be a, it's going to be o, and then 드디어 you can attach the ending. So altogether we have 있어요. So now the actual form, present tense, of there is. So now we can actually use it, place it in the 문장, the sentence. There is, of course, is there if it's a question. So let's place a 물음표 at the end of the 문장 to indicate that it's a 질문. Okay, so now we have the whole 문장 천천히 읽을게요. 뭔 비밀 있어요? 뭔 비밀 있어요? 뭔 비밀 있어요? Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay. So now let's take a look into the whole 대화 and see how it flows if there is no pause in between. So at first, 천천히 읽을게요. 왜 문을 닫고 얘기해요? 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. 뭔 비밀 있어요? With more 속도, speed. 왜 문을 닫고 얘기해요? 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. 뭔 비밀 있어요? With extra 속도. 왜 문을 닫고 얘기해요? 그냥 습관적으로 닫은 거예요. 뭔 비밀 있어요?